Now I want to use the rest of this episode to talk about a follow-up to the issue of chinuch, limudei chayil, and so on. And also fill in some little gaps that I did not address in previous episodes. I want to begin, first of all, a few things that I said. So this is now the fourth, believe it was the fourth time I'm speaking about it. This is episode 27. I began in episode 24, speaking about it. We spoke about the Rebbe's battle against Tachlis, and I want to address that a little more. We spoke about the Tanya Perek Ches, and we learned it inside. And then we spoke last week about the issues, how that applies to what the Rebbe expects of us. I want to just sum up one critical point and then just fill in some gaps. I want to read a Sikha also as well from Eikev Tavshim Mem Ches. Let me just pull it out from the shelf here. Sorry about that, but we need to look at it inside. Okay. So the main thing, and this I think just to sum up, sometimes in Arichas things get lost. The Rebbe and Chassidus in general, Chassidus applied, comes to teach us and trains us to think in context of Das Elyon. Let's use that word. The world, the material world, thinks everything from the bottom up. How does science work? How does wisdom work? Just like a little child takes a clock, opens it up, and sees what makes it tick. We go Mamatul Lamayla. Das Tachten sees a universe and then extrapolates and tries to understand what put it here. So we try to understand the what of existence. Das Elyon sees it from the perspective of God. What did God intend with creating the world? What did God intend in creating this clock? What did God intend in creating you and I? This is what Chassidus comes to do. Torah in general. Torah is what? It's chem de gnuza. It's chachmasev v'retzein eshel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The wisdom and the desire and will of God. And it's essentially giving us a blueprint of existence the way the Torah sees it. These are very different perspectives, and they clash. Now, the important thing to mention here is that we're being trained, Torah in general, as I said, Chassidus in particular, and the Rebbe in particular. So this is a fundamental principle that affects us all to see the world in a different way. That's why I said we have to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. For us to succumb, even al pitei to find a heter, to be part of the world, that's not why we were sent here. We were sent to change the world. So it's a Das Elyon. But the thing is, Das Elyon, not to remain in heaven and look at it from the Rekiah Hashvi. Das Elyon should inform Das Tachten, that the way we think, the way we act, the way we speak, the way we behave in the material world, from the things that we do, mitzvahs, to the divrei reshus, to work and business, should be saturated, should be informed, and should be directed by Das Elyon. So yes, this is a very unique and a gift that we were given. So you were given a gift, your neshama comes down to earth to introduce a higher perspective on everything in life. And you become part of the thing you were supposed to inform. You have now forgotten why you came, and you're now here and become part of existence that you were supposed to train. Now it's training you, or you've become hostage to it. That's what we're talking about here. That's why this isn't a small matter. It's basically the whole foundation of our lives. And if you look at the Sikhs, and I'll just quote a few more specifically, this is the essence. So before I get to that, I just want to follow up a few points. I mentioned the story a few weeks back about the circle and the dot in the center. So actually, the story that Rebbe told to a person, the key thing, all knowledge is the circle. But the center is the purpose of life. Like someone wrote to me, secular wisdom teaches you vos. Torah teaches you farvos. Secular wisdom talks about existence, what the metzius of the world is. And Torah teaches you what is beyond the world, how you transform the world as beyond, and don't see the world as a given. In the language of Chassidus, Torah teaches you elikus b'pshitus. God is reality, and the world is a novelty. The world teaches, even wisdom of the world teaches, the world is reality, and God is the novelty. As Chassidus says, yesh ma'ayin. What's the yesh? Yesh amiti, is God real, and this is ayin? Or is this yesh, and that's ayin, as an unknown? And that's what's at stake here. And that's why the Rebbe went to war literally in educating us, to teach our children from the youngest of age to know the center. You first build the foundation, then you build the floors above it. These are analogies that the Rebbe brings in places. So to fill in some gaps in Teira Shalom, in Sikh of Yutas Kis of Tafresh Pei, the last year of the Rebbe Rashab's Chaim Chayuse Baal Medain, page 244, he talks about this, the difference between Aristotle and the Rambam that I mentioned last week. Eagle and the center, the difference between the Kuda and the eagle around it. That Aristotle began with the eagle around it and looked for the center, the hub, the focal point. And the Rambam began with the focal point and then went out to the center. And also the famous story that you hear from Ashpiyim and so on, that when Aristotle behaved in a way that was inconsistent with his philosophies, he says, now I'm not Aristotle. Bertrand Russell, another philosopher, later, more contemporary one, did something immoral. And he was called in by the board of his university. He said, you're a professor of morality, how can you act like that? He says, I also teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. Contrast that with what? With the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, where he says that how do you know who's a wise person? You don't look at their oratory skills, at their brilliance, at their exposition, at their mind, brain power, their IQ. You look at how they eat and how they drink, and how they walk and how they talk and how they sleep and how they deal with small matters. Because in Teira, yes, you are what you teach and you teach what you are. It's not this, I'm not a triangle. Obviously, none of us are perfect, but to make that and aspire to it, an academic world where we say, actually, it doesn't even matter. I'm brilliant in the idea. Don't look at what I do. Look at what I teach. In Teira, it's all about the tachlis of Chochmah, Maisim Tevim, Reishis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. The whole idea is about changing this world. And these stories just captured. I'm just filling in a little more about things that we talked about. So bottom line, Das Tachten tolerates duality, maybe even advocates duality. Das Elyon advocates unity, everything toward a purpose, toward a direction. Consistency between your mind and your actions. That's how the Rebbe wanted us to look. So, a few other things in this context. I want to read Ha'ara in Ekev Tavshin Mem Ches. As a sikha, I had the schus to prepare. It's a tremendous Ha'ara from the Rebbe in this sikha of Ekev, where he talks about Teira. So he says in the Prim, I'm reading on page 590 in Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Mem Ches. He says like this. Alle Sachen in Welt, everything in the world, I'll translate it, I won't read the Yiddish. You can look it up. It starts on 589 and goes to 590 in this context. Everything in the world exists first in the Teira. God looked into the Teira as a blueprint, and with that he created the world. Okay, this is something we're very familiar with. According to that, according to the blueprint, the Teira, that's how they were created. So there's no such thing in the world, the Rebbe says, that Chaz v'Sholem, Teira has not something to say about it. Because everything that exists started in the blueprint. So the blueprint has to say something. It doesn't have any place else to be created if it's not in the blueprint. It's like looking at a building that was built by an architect and there's an extra room. Where'd that extra room come from? It has to be in the blueprint somewhere. So everything in the world has a heirah, as a directive, how the Teira says you should behave with it. And the Rebbe then says Ha'ara. In Ha'ara 10, on 590, in Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Mem Ches, volume 2. V'yiseirim ezeh, ha'teira megala amitis ha'metzias v'tachlis shall kol davar. The Teira reveals the true nature and purpose of everything. How that thing is b'sharshei u'mekere b'teira. From where it was created by God. Through the Asias, the letters of the 10 Maimoris, and their tziruf mechilufim, as he explains in Shai Yochid V'Amun. Hainu, sha'ashimish ba'adovat tzorech liyas masim la'amitis mitziyoseh. That means the use of this object, or this phenomenon, the function of it, has to be consistent to its true nature, and its true being, as it's in the world, is when you use it for what the Teira directs it. So just to use an example that it doesn't say here. God said, It says in the Medrash that God created gold only for the Mishkan, but for Bechira he allows gold to be used for other purposes. The Rebbe uses this about technology in Mishpatim Tovshem Mem Dalet. Talks about Tanya on the radio. So what does this mean? You want to know what's the true nature of gold? It was created in order to sanctify it in a Beis HaMikdash. To say that gold is being used for something else, that's Das Tach. Das Elyon says, look how the Torah, what the Torah says it's for, and everything has, and that's its true use. Now God also allows us to use it also for other things, Rishus. Listen to this. And if you don't use it the way the Torah says, it's not just you're doing something not God according to Torah, and Hepech Rotzen Hashem, and against God's will, God forbid. You're actually defying the very nature and personality of the thing itself. It's a tremendous concept. Everything in this world. The Rebbe actually goes on and explains that this is the shtalshel, that's why also science works this way. To understand the true muhus and tchuna of a thing, you don't just look at the object, the symptoms, you look at the causes. The essence of technology is to understand the laws of nature that shape nature. That the Rebbe is saying in the shtalshel, from the way from Torah, that everything is rooted in Torah. Ela b'chochmas ha'umma is in the wisdom of the nations. How does it gashmi? There, you're only learning about the physical source. For example, how do we tap into create a microchip through understanding the microscopic particles of subatomic energy, quantum mechanics? And through Torah, you also distinguish, you can recognize in the spiritual root. And through that, you understand the purpose for which it was created. Klor, difference between Torah and Chochmas HaOmas. Here I mentioned that Rebbe, it said, the Rebbe took out the Gam and just left the B'shar She'aruchni, which we can learn much from, which is why you ultimately go to a doctor to heal. Because if the Torah also gives you the Gashmi's Dika root, then only Torah. But Torah does leave room for the scientist and for human beings to figure out things Mamata Lamaila. But if you want to know the purpose, the center, the foundation, then you have to Torah. So this brings me to the question, to the Sikha that I mentioned, but I want to elaborate a little more. The Sikhas, two Sikhas in Tafshin Tezvav. We're talking now 1954 and 55. 54 because it was Simchas Torah, and 55 Yud Shvat. So Simchas Torah, Yom Simchas Torah, Yud Tavshin Tezvav, and Yud Shvat Tavshin Tezvav are two sikhas where the Rebbe lays out passionately foundations of education, and especially to children. I would recommend everyone reads this, because this also answers another question a lot of people ask, why the Rebbe didn't intervene directly in the Moedas Chinuch to make them much better than they are. He did. Read the sikha. The only thing is the Rebbe couldn't go to the school itself and talk to each principal and teacher. He said very clearly the statements here. The bottom line principle in both these sikhs is, let's start with the number one thing with children. You want to teach children, the Rebbe says, number one, not knowledge, not even knowledge and Torah. You want to teach them to be Yirei Shamayim, to know there's a God in this world, to know the foundation, the Rebbe says, the Yesod. Sadly, the Rebbe says, the schools, even our good schools, are using the time, instead of teaching these foundations, they're teaching them side things, including Limudei Chel. What is the battle here against Limudei Chel? Not that we shouldn't know math and penmanship or other things like that. You're taking away the foundation of a young, impressionable mind. It's to teach them there's a God. You only have one chance to do that. It's so much harder to do it later. Like one wise person said, it's infinitely easier to educate a young child than to fix a broken adult. The Rebbe goes to war of how we shape lives. How do we create a Das Elyon individual? How do we create someone who's going to be drafted in God's army, in the Rebbe's army, to change the world and not become part of the world? You do that at the youngest age. If you understand the kavanah of what the Rebbe wants, the whole thing makes sense. The Rebbe's not coming to knock education. He's coming to focus what is the foundation and what's an instrument. You don't want children to master how to use a hammer and a screwdriver before they understand why there's a hammer and screwdriver in the world in the first place. Then the instruments follow. So the Rebbe says, in answering the question, what is actually the age? Here's a question. I'm going to read a few questions, as many as I can, and then I'll continue rest in the next episode. What is the exact age to start teaching? So in Simchas Torah, I'm just reading directly. I want to read straight from the Rebbe's own words because I don't want to interpret it. The Rebbe says like this, Simchas Torah I'm reading. Erste 3 Jahr, wenn ein Kind hebt an lernen, das ist die Zeit, was jemalt ist der ganze Yesod, soll matzliach sein auf später. The first 3 years that a child begins to study, that's the Yesod, the foundation that lays, that he will succeed the rest of it later as well. You educate a child his way, also he gets older, he doesn't waver from it. Is nennt man dem Kind, man ist mit Tame, the Meach mit English, Grammarke, that's grammar, Halavai wollten Gräse echt nicht gewusst von dem. Heit me koschen a Kind bis 9 Jahr, bis 12 Jahr, und ich wollte sagen, ich weiter nur te fasten, maar über Leute fasten. So basically the Rebbe is saying, not to contaminate, he says the first 3 years, wait till age 9, maybe age 12, and later too, but I can't grasp everything. You don't grab everything. You don't bite off more than you can chew, so to speak. Don't grab everything because then you end up not grabbing anything. So many wonder, what does this mean? Does he want children not to know how to read, how to speak? Well, we know that Rebbe wanted people to go to shuls and chazar chassidus, and obviously the language of the people to get up in chazar in Yiddish or in French or in Spanish or in Hebrew when people speak English is not going to work. We also know there are basics, but to make it a worship it, like he says in the Sikha of Yud Shvat, he talks about the klippa of America is tachlis. Tells a whole story with the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, when one of his grandchildren got married, one of the gifts he got was a special hat that was like the modern type of hat. It was a gift that had a special type of fur. And Alter Rebbe saw that, so he told him that if you cut off this part, you'll be you will be with me together in my mechitza, meaning in the world to come, in the same department, so to speak, in the same area. So Einikel said, do I have to actually feel that, or did I just do it because you said so? So the Rebbe says, Vaystays, that's how it stayed, because he didn't hold that it's emes yet. And later, this Einikel went to cry in Hadich, where the Alter Rebbe's tzion is, that he did not realize that it should have been right away feel it beprimis. The Rebbe uses it that what was the Frierdiker Rebbe explained? What was the problem? What's wrong with having a hat? It wasn't us. It didn't do something prohibited, but the Alter Rebbe saw that was the klippa of the time, and he thought the klippa of the time was this modern fashion. The klippa of our time, the Rebbe says in the Sikh at the end of Yud Shvat Tovshin Tezvav, is tachlis, the worship that you must get a secular education in order to be successful in this world. That's a klippa. Then he goes to a second klippa, he calls it pirsum, that everything has to be PR, publicity. That's not for now. So he says the war has to be tachlis. He actually speaks about the bochrim to dedicate their lives to Torah. He developed then a keren Torah to help support. The Rebbe was not advocating ignorance or illiteracy. He was advocating the focus that you should have people who have clear-headed, what is Das Elyon? That they should come to change the world and not be part of the world. You can read the Sikha on your own. There's a lot of fascinating lines there, tremendous lines. He talks about the yeshiva system. He talks about educators who focus more on in the Kiyashvi, in deep Biyurim and Rambam, and not teaching children and students the Yesodus of Yiras Shamayim and of Hashgacha Pratis, and there's a God, and so on. You have to read it. It's a tremendous, I think, directive. If we built our schools just following the Sikha of Yud Shvat Tovshin Tezvav, we'd have many problems solved. As I said a number of times, Chassidus applied. The whole point is look into the Rebbe's words and let's just follow it. And if you follow it, you'll find Hatzlacha, Begashmis, and Beruchnis. The Rebbe talks at length about the Parnasa issue as well. So with that said, let me just read as much as I can with the time allowing. Questions about the age that children should learn and what they can learn. Pertaining to the Limudei Chel series you're teaching now, my Yetzer Hara asks, When did the Rebbe want our chinuch to be al taras hakodesh and not to waste time going to college? This is during the time when we should all be spending our time in hafotza. I'm referring to a case that a bocher in his 20s and hashkofet tznius and tachlis are not the issue. But nowadays, when most of us will not be able to go to shliach, we could be shluchim, and probably a small minority of us will, then we are no longer wasting our time by going to college or instituting limudei chel. Is this not somewhat true? This is assuming that the Rebbe had a plan in mind when he insisted we not waste time going to college, but nowadays, batla sibon is batla mesubov, which means when the cause is not there, the effect is not there. Well, my friend, let me tell you, the Rebbe wanted to train all of us to think with das elyon eyes. Whether you call it shliach, or whether you call it official or not official, this is what the Rebbe came to do. And nobody is immune. Nobody is off the reservation in this regard. It's teaching you no matter what you do. Even if you end up going to work, I'm not getting now why people make different choices, is to look at your work from a das elyon perspective. That's what I was emphasizing. If not, what do we need a Torah? What do we need a Chassidus? What do we need the Rabbeim? What, to just tell us that we should follow Shulchan Aruch? That's a dover pashut. They came to teach us a perspective of a different way of looking at the universe. They're looking at yourself, looking at existence. So there's no batla sibah, there's no batla mesubav. That remains. If you learn Tanya Peder Ches, it's not because you go on shlichus, so you don't need limudei chel because you can make money by raising money for your Chabad house. No, it's a perspective that you're here to change the world. You want to do it in your workplace? Fine. That's what the Rebbe expects of us. Limudei chel is an instrument at best. It's a tool. Sometimes you could hire someone for that. Some of us will never be accountants, lawyers, and doctors. And yet we need that in life. You need an accountant to be able to do your books, a bookkeeper. Some of us hire people to write letters for us. Why suddenly, when it comes to business, we're constantly hiring all kinds of third parties, and suddenly here, we say, no, I have to do it myself. Yourself here is that you have to be a soul doctor. You have to be a das elyon visionary. Doesn't mean you all have to be philosophers, but you have to look at the world, like he speaks at length, that the first thing is that there's a God. The first thing is a purpose. And now we come into a world and figure out how the world fulfills the purpose. Not the first thing there's a world and then figure out how God fits in. So this remains universal. This is the foundation of all of Torah, all of Chassidus, and all of the Rebbe. So there's no change at all in this. It manifests in different ways. So whatever you're doing this das elyon introduction to the universe, you're fulfilling what the Rebbe wants. There's obviously ways to do it in a more optimal way. It's much easier sometimes to do it when you're a full-time shliach in that sense. But on the other hand, as we read the Hayom Yom, there's an advantage of doing it as a business person. What exactly, in question number 2, is the Rebbe's opinion about teaching children any English secular subjects such as reading, math, basic penmanship? These are functional subjects needed today. I would say, based on the Sikh in Yud Shvat, if you're worshiping the tool chest and you're missing the foundation, then that's what has to be the focus. But if someone knows there's a foundation, obviously a building also has floors. So I don't see the Rebbe negating. They say in France, Rab Nissen, who definitely was no secular education, they taught the Talmidim French. They taught them basic skills. So bring a tutor in. But it's clear you're teaching the tool. That's all you're teaching, an instrument. At what age? I read, whether it's 9, whether it's earlier. Look, let's be honest. Even if you don't give any education to children, they're going to be speaking English before 9 years old because most people speak English. They're going to be picking it up. So, but in replacing, the foundation is only one. There's no 2 foundations. The foundation is God's plan for the world. The foundation is that you are an agent of God's. You're a das elyon agent of God's. And then come the instruments. If it's in that context, guaranteed it's case by case. I can't say there's a black and white. You have the Rebbe's words that I read. But it comes down to basic common sense.